So as part of my journey, this is 2018, as part of my journey I really started to look into the electromagnetic nature of the universe, that it wasn't simply just a ball, a rock, versus a rock of a pizza, like most people tend to think, that there had to be something much greater. And as part of my journey in 2015, I did ayahuasca, or DMT specifically, and that showed me that the universe is not material, it's all light, it's all vibration, and Nikola Tesla confirmed as much, that if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of frequency, sound and vibration. Hi guys, come on in. You've just missed my little entree presentation. We've got about an hour. So what I hope to do is to run through my presentation. It was meant to be on a big projector, so it would have been easy for everybody to see and hopefully really informative. So please forgive me that it's just on the laptop. What I'm going to start with is just to ask people this question really. Are you still, anyone still trusting the government here? Please raise your hand if you're still trusting the government.
I love my mind control.
MK Ultra is real and is very much present in all of our lives. But I love the t-shirt that says fake NASA. So it suggests that you've not obeyed, stayed in fear, and been shamed by the government to behave in a particular way. But this is what government, which means mind control, actually stands for in our world today. And it means, you know, this is one of the hard things, that it means that a lot of the areas that you might have been taught in school or through higher education have also been tainted by the same entity that we call government. Because government is not only just about the politicians at Westminster, it's about our education system. And if you want to control the minds, you've got to get them as young as possible. Give me the boy till 7 and I'll give you the man, say the Catholics. And so we know that what's happening in our world is a total control of the media and all elements of our education system, which means that our history, as you saw in that video, history is written by the victors. Our history has been contrived such as to create the various divisions and the various ideas of who and what we are. But that includes geography, science as well, and I'm here to question some of the mainstream accepted science. And welfare, taxation, straw man, these are all things that we all probably know about, and these are all elements of the control system. So it's like a multi-headed hydra that has enveloped pretty much everything that we are for generations. Our parents, our grandparents were born into a system they didn't understand. We live in the information age and we're beginning to understand the nature of it. SQV, most people know what that is now. 1666, and how all of that was used to create the straw man and to trick us into giving away our sovereignty, to take our power from us essentially. And also this, you won't be able to see it from the back perhaps, but I've got the logos of NASA, ESA, JAXA, the Chinese Space Agency, India's got a space agency, even South Africa, where my accent comes from, has a space agency, believe it or not. In fact, although this may not be connected to the South African Space Agency, I met a chap who dives for NASA. He works for NASA in South Africa, and he dives onto a black box which is buried at the bottom of a deep lake called the Vaal Dam. And he goes down there once a day, plugs in, takes data, and then sends it back to NASA. Now what the heck would NASA, the space agency, have any interest in seismic activity or activity going on under the ground? But perhaps they're using that data to furnish satellite engineers or universities with data that they believe they're receiving from something 20,000 miles up in the so-called vacuum of space. NASA costs the American taxpayer about $75 million per day. Per day. $75 million per day. And they've been doing that for 50 or 60 years, but they've lost the technology to go back to the moon. This is in their own words. It's a difficult process, according to Don Petit, an astronaut. It's a difficult process, and he's a representative of NASA. It's a difficult process to rebuild that technology. And yet your mobile phone is technologically eons away from the technology used for the Apollo moon landings. I'll add, while I'm thinking about the Apollo moon landings, they were led by a guy, the rocketry was led by a guy called Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun was a Nazi scientist brought to America under Operation Paperclip. Werner von Braun does two things that I find interesting. One is he writes a book in 1952, I think it's published in 54, about a guy called Elon taking mankind to Mars. No shit. He's actually written a book in 1952 about a man called Elon, and it's the Elons who are actually the first people from Earth to go to Mars. Science fiction, but based on the possibility. However, Werner von Braun has only one quote on his tombstone, Psalms 19:1. And I've got that on my flyer here, and it says that the heavens showeth God's handiwork, and the firmament is the evidence of that. We believe they've never been able to take anything higher than the Kármán line, which is about 100 miles high. So let me take you to the stars in the way that NASA will never do. And I'll play just a minute or so of this video where this is an amateur astronomer or an amateur camera photographer who's taken the P900 camera, or it's a P1000, Nikon P1000, which has got 100 times zoom on it. And I've tried one of these myself, and you can literally zoom in on the stars and see them doing things, moving through these cycles. Each star has its own color pattern. Each star has its own frequency movement. Now, when we ask this question about the twinkling of the stars when we're children, we're told that the light is coming through our atmosphere and being perturbed by the atmosphere such that it appears to be this twinkling, flashing thing, rather than it's just a solid rock reflecting light back from millions of years, or in the case of some of these stars, they're billions of years away, and it's a fire that's burning. But when we look at Mercury, for example, what we see is this color pattern. And the color pattern for Mercury is very different to Arcturus or the North Pole star. So why is it what NASA give us these perfect spheres, and yet what we see is that? Now, most telescopes today are digitally enhanced. What they do is they take all of this flashing and they turn it into a more solid-looking circle. And that's what they do with NASA, is that they take data and they interpret it as it's a ball, it's solid. The idea that gas in this world will dissipate into the environment. If I punctured a deodorant can, no one would question. They know exactly what's going to happen. The high pressure is going to be forced into the low pressure environment, and it will spread in the room completely. But according to our science, or we're taught when we're 7 years old and young enough not to question some of this stuff, is that gas under its own weight will start to form a ball. And that ball will be so dense that the sunlight from a million or hundreds of millions of miles away will bounce off that and show you a star that looks something like the ones I've been showing you here. So these bodies that are in the sky are really there. But the question is, are they truly light years away, or are they something far more local? Why is it possible that I can take my Nikon camera and fill the viewfinder with this object? But if I find something at 50 miles away on a clear day, I can't fill my viewfinder with that at 50 miles. So you've got to ask the question, are our telescopes really able to see, or is light really able to travel infinitely far to my eye, or are things far more close? And intellectually we know that if we build a light on Earth, like a lighthouse for example, it's only going to be seen for 30, 40, maybe even 50 miles, but not much further than that. Why? Because light dissipates over time. There is something called the inverse square law, that as you halve the distance to the light source, the light will brighten in twice the amount. And if we take that same inverse square law and apply it to the moon, the bright light that we see down here on Earth, and travel 250,000 miles or 240,000 miles back to the moon using the inverse square law, by the time we get to the moon, the light has to be so bright that when Neil Armstrong and co. walked around there, that we should have been, and they should have been, blinded by the intensity of that light, rather than the dull, grey images that we have often seen. And now when we look at their landing craft under 4K resolution, we notice that, wow, it looks like it's all buckled, there's holes, there's rivets missing, it looks like plastic poles are holding something up that high school children built, rather than it was robust enough to land on the moon. And most people don't know this, but they never got the lunar lander to work on the Earth. They never were able to steer the thing. They got about 40 seconds of airtime, and Neil Armstrong had to eject. That was the best they could ever show us. And as I inferred during my little presentation there, they've never taken the spacesuit, put it in a vacuum chamber with a man in it. The one time they tried, they got partial vacuum, and the man's tongue started to boil, and they stopped the experiment. So they've never put a man in a spacesuit in a vacuum chamber. But these are the stars as we see them. These are the twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. We've been told by NASA it's a rock and a gas giant. You cannot let one go in a lift and expect for it to stay in a nice little basketball shape and bounce it out of the lift as you leave. It's going to go around the entire lift. That's thermodynamics. Come on in. So now, when I've been looking at this for the last 7 or 8 years, I've started to ask myself the same questions that anyone should. Is that if they're not rocks floating on a cushion of time and space, which is what we're taught through relativity, if they're not there, then what possibly could they be? Well, a study of cymatics is a good place to start. And what I've got here is cymatics in a ferrofluid. And when you notice with different, you've probably seen experiments like this where you can take a vibration plate, put different frequencies through it, and either using liquid or salt, these technicians can get these things to create these beautiful patterns, sacred geometric shapes, really. And so everything in our world, it seems, is built on vibration. That with a particular vibration, as Dr. Emoto showed us with his frozen water, where he showered the water with love or hate, he can get beautiful patterns created. Well, in cymatics, we see the same thing. We can create beautiful patterns, or disharmonic, like they've done with the 440 hertz with the music, is they can create disharmony. And so you can actually make someone sick or healthy using only vibration. And I believe the ancients used our old buildings, the cathedrals that we see, they used these with their oculus and their geometric shaped windows to create a sound resonance that was healing for people. That's what I believe churches were once upon used for. So this is a star that you can see, and this almost perfectly mimics some of the vibratory patterns. And each star has a different vibratory signature, and that's in the macrocosm. So within the microcosm, you have chakras, which are like stars, which each have their own vibratory signature, their own pattern. And so we are a collection of vibration that modern science calls DNA, but we are a collection of vibration. And the universe is mimicked. So what you see out there exists within. This is the star in a jar experiment. I know some of you guys can't see, unfortunately, but you may have come across the star in a jar experiment. That's sonoluminescence. Sonoluminescence, sound, light. What they do is they fire a beam of sound into a jar of a liquid, and a cavitation begins to occur. And once the cavitation goes full, it's almost like a nuclear event. It's an implosion event rather than an explosion event, and it creates a star in a jar. Mainstream science, not contested, using frequency in water to create a light. So what if we have water above, just like the Genesis version of the story is that there's waters above and waters below, and separated in this is this bubble, and outside of the bubble, if you like, there is energies moving above us. And those energies, perhaps in water, are creating what we perceive as stars. So that's the little bit on stars. This is mainstream science showing how it could all be this electromagnetic system. A guy called David Lapointe, I'll let him explain what he's done here with two magnetic bulbs and electricity.
Unless we properly understand the basic magnetic field structure, we will never be able to properly understand the fundamental forces of matter, from the subatomic to the galactic.
That's important.
In this presentation, you will be shown that correcting this one basic misunderstanding of magnetic field also explains most all of our problems in physics and astrophysics.
This is real science and a real
I believe
experiment.
that this magnetic field structure is an intrinsic property of all matter. Therefore, you cannot have a particle of matter unless these magnetic fields are there to form it and confine it.
Important. That's important. Electric with magnetic fields to confine it. So the only way you can create matter is by crushing light through a magnetic process. So I believe that we may well be, these are torus systems. If you don't already know, everyone probably knows of torus is like a donut. But that's the outside of the torus. Through the center of the torus, you've got energy moving in a whirlpool way, like water does down the plug hole. And at the pinch point of your hourglass, as where the salt gets pinched and released, that pinch point is the center of everything. That's where what David Lapointe was showing in his experiment there, where that light was fusing in the center. That's what they call later on in his science, and there's hours and hours of this stuff to look through, but they call it an accretion disk. And accretion is an anagram for creation. And I believe that between the L and the Ma, the L being the masculine electricity, and the Ma being the feminine magnetism, they come together within an ether. That's your trinity. The ether, the electricity, and the magnetism are needed in that vacuum chamber to create what I believe is the conditionality for matter to form. And I'll stretch it a little bit further and say, if we are an electromagnetic apple or torus system, that right at the center of that torus is your heart. And we all know that heart is an anagram for earth. So right at the center of this whole system is earth, and right at the center of you is your heart. And I believe we stand on the center of a system. If I can offer you to think of an apple, if you cut the apple top to bottom, let it fall open. We're at the top, that's the north, and at the bottom is the south. In the center are the seeds. And the seeds are the bringers of new life. And earth is the only place in which new life can be brought forth. This is the seed, and we carry the seed ourselves to bring new life. So it's all connected. Oh, come on in.
Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. And what I've demonstrated here, what I'm just offering, and I have loads of these, but there are so many logos in our world, MasterCard and Gucci and Under Armour I've used here. But McDonald's, if you bring two McDonald's logos together, you can create the same shape where there is this two-sided torus system, and for each of us at the belly would be the midpoint of the figure eight. So you've got one side here and the other side here. And this figure eight that I've just drawn around me is spinning around me in 360 degrees. Yeah. So that's the center, and that's why I believe we are connected to our mother.
Yeah, sorry, Vanessa.
No.
I believe we're connected to the mother at the belly button, because that's the beginning, that's the center point. And that's the most important part for the seeds of the apple. Right there, they will land on the soil, and there's the nourishment to bring new life. But the logos in our world, so many of them are encoding this truth, that it's all a toroidal system. And as I say to people, in nature, the fruit will show us that the skin is on the outside, and the product, the new life potential, is on the inside. We can't exist on the outside, on the peel, on the bark, on the shell. Everything is contained in nature within that. The heliocentric model is the only thing in nature that's not. And it breaks the laws of thermodynamics as well. So what does this mean for sun worship or heliocentrism? Because that's essentially what it is. I think that the occult have tricked us into seeing the sun as the primary thing here, rather than what we are. The earth is primary, the sun is servant to that. We are the center, and the sun and the moon are products or elements within the system. So these, by the way, are, and you can't see them unfortunately at the back there, but these are ancient cosmologies, Norse, Indian, Egyptian. All these ancient cosmologies always drew, the Hebrews, they always drew like a spherical shape within which, just like the orange is a spherical shape, oblate perhaps, but within which we must exist. Come on in. For those who can't see, what I've depicted here are a cut-through orange, a cut-through tomato, and an apple cut top to bottom. So the orange is cut through the equator. And I believe that these spiral segments of the equator, you could draw an earth on. You could say at the center of this, we have this earth wheel. And the tomato is a great example of that. It has seeds, which could be our seeds, around which it has filaments, really strong filaments that connect it to the body of the tomato. And I think that if we look at nature and look at examples of that, we go, okay, well, maybe an electromagnetic system could be built around me, like that, and it could be built around the entire universe in the same way. But there's two ways of cutting the fruit. You can cut it north to south like this and let it fall open, and there you see the seeds. Or you could cut it through the equator and open it up in that way. Well, I believe that we're lying on our back, that whatever the system is lying on our back, and when we look up at the night sky and we see the stars moving over us, we see the stars move. It's this wheel that's turning. The orange, you're right at the pith at the center, and the orange is turning over you. And the pith of the orange carries the electrical charge that fills the orange with fruit. So I believe that the electrical system that's above us is feeding us, is nourishing us. Which is why the zodiacal signs and the placement of the wandering stars, Pluto, Mars, Mercury, Venus, etc., is so important to us individually. Because we're within it and we're being nourished by it. Now, there is something mainstream science does called the background radiation survey. And they used to do it every year. I don't know if they've done it since 2015, but they use a device to measure all the incoming radiation from the universe. And every time they do it, it's called the W map. And every time they do it, Earth is always right at the center. That's a real philosophical problem for them, and they try not to talk too much about it, because it's inconceivable that we could be in a Big Bang that's been traveling for 13 billion, although they've now changed that to 26 billion years, that has been traveling for all of this time, and we just happen to be right center of all of it. The same is true with the stars. You know, we're told that we are moving at 1,000 miles an hour right here, and then that we're traveling around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour, and the sun is traveling at 660,000 miles through the Milky Way, and the Milky Way is traveling at over 1 million miles an hour through the universe. So there's 4 movements that our Earth is going through, which means that probably all the other bodies that we see out there are also similarly moving, spinning, wobbling, going off in all sorts of directions. And yet, for thousands of years, those stars have stayed in the canopy in exactly the same position as though we were at a discotheque watching the lights just flick around like this every 24 hours. The idea that everything is spinning off wildly in many, many different directions and vectors at eye-watering speeds, and yet have not moved out of perfect alignment in all of this time, is one of those myths that we're meant to just overlook, or say that it's just so far away, this is why we don't notice any sort of parallax occurring over time. Of course, there should be parallax. So the background radiation WMAP is a key piece of science that does point to us perhaps being the center of the apple. It's the core of the Earth. Maybe is right here. And while I'm talking about core of the Earth, how deep have we dug? Can anyone tell me what is the deepest mankind has ever dug into the Earth?
7 miles.
7 miles. The Kola Deep in Russia. I think 7.5, somewhere around there. But we're not going to swabble. It did take them over 2 years to get the last 20 centimeters. Their bits and everything just couldn't handle the heat, the hardness, and so on. So mankind doesn't really know what's below us. The deepest we can go by sub apparently is less than 4 miles. Sorry to be droll. But, so we don't really know an awful lot about what's beneath our feet, and we don't know an awful lot about what's above our heads, and perhaps we need to be comfortable with that. You see, we've got so caught up with our ideas. As Nikola Tesla said, modern scientists have got so caught up with their theories and their maths equations that they're building a reality which no longer resembles the truth of where we are. So this idea of light speed and warping of time and space and all of these sorts of concepts that are now accepted as almost law. I get lots of people in the street tell me that gravity is a law, not a theory. And that we can all be on the top of a globe in the way that relativity insists, that all of us are having squashed on the top of a globe looking down on everything, rather than there's people in Africa or South America who are having to come back up because they traveled down from the northern region. So that's WMAP. So the question is do we live on a sphere in which people are able to walk upside down, and rivers are able to form up the side of Africa, in the case of the Nile, for thousands of miles, and go up a ball, and planes and ships have no problem going sort of uphill because of relativity, this theory, right? Whereas we know with the Panama Canal that in order to come down a mountain, to go over a mountain, you have to have a body of straight water, flat water, parallel to every other body of water, and then you put that ship into a lock, you raise it or lower it in order to continue the journey downhill. The Suez Canal is a good example of 120 kilometers of perfectly level engineered body of water, where there's no locking required. And if there was an imbalance, then in physics, if I built this in a lab, then the water would run down that way. I wouldn't be able to contain it unless I had to put dams in. Or are we walking atop a flat plane? But we live in a world in which some people, now this is NASA practicing being on Mars. They're practicing obviously on Earth because they haven't been to the moon, let alone going to Mars. And Elon Musk is a CIA or a deep state agent. But this is what people believe. And now if in 5 years or 10 years they tell people on TV that they built craft that can go to Mars, and that some people, please join. Some people are going to be going off to Mars, then, oh, come on in. It's like Piccadilly Circus. You know, that this is how they will, in my view, this is how they are preparing to film it, or to create that idea that we're actually on Mars. And I put this other image here of the typically imagined flat Earth when people are presented with flat Earth as a concept. And that is that we're on a disk floating in space, which could be nothing further from the truth as far as I'm concerned. That whatever space is, whatever's out there, I have hypothesized today that it's water, but I don't know. And I'm willing to accept, be at peace with that. But the idea that we're floating or rising or doing anything other than being stationary inside of something, no flat earther I know would claim that, although many people would claim that this was true if they were told, BBC announced tonight, oh man, it's just Chinese have just landed a man on the moon. I'm talking about the Chinese landing a rover on the moon recently. If you go and look at the images of that and you can't see that it's CGI, then get back to me because you need some more information. Okay, so the evidence for the flat Earth. Well, I start with water. I'm going to offer you that your natural senses should be telling you that the Earth is not spinning. But when you were 6 years old, you were told that your senses were not true enough and that you could not feel such spin. And then I'm going to address what gravity might well be, rather than this ability to draw everything into a center point. What I've got here is the continental cross-section of America from Los Angeles through to New York. And what you'll notice is that's a straight line. But when they give you an image of America from space, you'll notice that there's an awful lot of curvature. But whenever you were in school and teacher drew, this pen unfortunately doesn't work very well, but when teacher drew, in the case of England, she would have gone from the west coast and the Midlands or whatever, and then come to the other coast on the other side. And there's sea, and then not only that, there's the English Channel, and here's France, and so on. Now, we know, if we're on an island, that the sea level all the way around the island is the same. If I travel from the east to the west coast of England, I'm going to go up to the Mendips, about 350 meters, something like that. And then when I'm going to get to Bournemouth, I'll have traveled down 350 meters. It's all flat. I mean, obviously we've got undulating landscape, but the sea level on Earth is the same, and they call it the mean sea level. And when topography is designed, when they say, oh, how high are you above sea level? It doesn't matter where that sea level is taken from. There is just the one sea level. Although USGS does admit or acknowledge that there is a 9-inch difference between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. That's it, 9 inches. And with tidal variations, people in England sometimes come across 20-foot tides. People on the equator have sometimes almost 1 or 2 foot tides. Now, if the moon is drawing on the water, it should be drawing on the water strongest at the equator and least strong at the edges of the ball at 55 degrees where we are up here. And if you're still thinking, no, it still works, it's not a problem, have you ever checked the Great Lakes in America, the tides that they have there, or should I say, don't have there? There are no tides on the Great Lakes. There is no tide in the Mediterranean Sea. There is no tide in the Scandinavian, Swedish Sea. There's no tides there. There might be swells, wind, pressure systems and so on can cause swelling, but there's no tides. Now, if this moon has got this strong gravity attracting water, why not those big bodies of water? So, when geologists draw, abyssal plains, and they draw, as they have, I've got shown here, some kind of mid-Atlantic ridge, they always draw these, again, from whether it be from England to America or on a shorter scale, they'll draw the sea coming down and down into some kind of deepness, and then it'll kind of flatten off, and it's smoothing, and then it'll come up again. And at the top, one body of flat water. I saw it recently with that submarine thing that happened with the Titanic. The BBC had put up a piece on it, and they'd drawn where it had happened and so on, and everything was strata. The water layers, this is where we get into deeper water, and we see this with this image here. Everything, just as we do with the atmosphere, everything is in strata. And you know that if you took a little glass container at home and put washing up liquid and water and oil and all these various liquids, they would all float in perfect levels. There'd be a little bit of convexity because of the surface tension against the glass, yes, but otherwise these would be perfect level, parallel strata of different liquids. If I made that container 1,000 miles long, I would expect scientifically to get the same result. Same floating, same parallel strata across the bodies. And that's what water, and that's why we build with water, using it as a level. That's why if I put my bottle of water or a glass of water on a table and the water in the cup were at an angle, the water would still retain perfect parallel with the ground or with the next body of water. It wouldn't care that the glass was tipped. That's what water does, and it shows us the truth of our realm. You can't see some of these images, I'm sorry back there, but I wanted to spotlight the salt plains in Bolivia, the Bolivian salt plains. It's known as the world's largest mirror. After a rainfall, you've got thousands of square kilometers that are covered with water and that act as a perfect mirror for all of the horizon, all of the clouds, everything around you. We call it a specular reflection when you go to a quiet lake, still lake in the morning, and there you see perfectly reflected trees, the skyline, everything is perfectly reflected. Why? If you went to a House of Horrors mirror, where it was bent, then you start to stretch the image, don't you? Well, if our lakes were at all convexed, it would stretch the image, and you would not get this perfect representation of the scene behind it. So water is a great, so I've put some images here of that. So the spinning ball theory says, as I said, we're traveling at about 1,000 miles an hour. Not only are we traveling at about 1,000 miles an hour, you can't detect it. When I ask people in the street, can you point to me the direction we're spinning? Some people who have enough time think about, okay, if the sun's moving that way, we must be moving in the opposite direction. We must be. But you can't feel it. And people don't go, we're going that way, of course. And the winds are coming in the opposite direction. No one ever does that. I fired long-range weaponry when I did my national service in South Africa. And we never once had to think about what direction we're traveling, because it's going to have a bearing on the rotation of the Earth. Because if I fire now and the target is 1,000 meters or 2,000 meters away, then the amount of time it's going to take to get there, the Earth spinning at faster than the speed of sound, is going to have moved the target, and I should have to account for that. Less so if they're in the west of me and they're coming towards me, and then the bullet will reach them more quickly. And the planes never have to allow for that kind of thing. And then I say to people, so we know that if we spun a wheel in a lab or in your bicycle at home in the garage, you know that the air just next to the wheel is going to be attracted just a little bit by friction, by the attraction of the moving surface. But as you move away from the wheel, there'll be less and less movement, less and less effect of my spinning wheel. And even the air that's with my wheel right now is going to be dragged behind and will be left behind. However, when we live on a globe that's spinning, the atmosphere is magically moving with the wheel. Not only is it moving with the wheel, it's speeding up as we go up. Why? Because the further you get away from the moving surface, if you want to keep the column of air on a still day, if you want to keep it above you, you have to motivate everything even faster up there. Now, in order to do that, you would have to have something forcing it. You need to have an additional pushing force to allow for that. And the geometry, or the implications of that, is that there is such an incredible system that's able to move the air with us. The only way we can do that in reality is to enclose all of the air, like in a plane or a train or a car. But you take the roof off the car, then you know immediately that you're moving at 100 miles an hour. So that's one of the things about the globe theory, the spinning Earth theory. And I should mention, while I'm thinking about it, that the interferometer was developed in the late 1800s by the best scientists in the world, the French and the English, Michelson, Morley, and Gale. These three scientists and others conducted numerous experiments using the interferometer to detect the movement of Earth, and they couldn't find this spin. George Airy, he couldn't find the spin. He was the astronomer royal, and he came up with what they now call Airy's failure, because it showed that the stars were moving and it wasn't us that was moving. So you've got the interferometer, and for years you couldn't deal with the interferometer problem until a guy called Lorentz came up with something called the Lorentz contraction, and that was this idea that, well, the machine, this metal-bodied interferometer, must be getting squashed by the movement of the Earth. That's why we can't detect the movement. It's all hocus pocus. Hello. Oh. It's all true. It's all true.
We have a different voice.
This is a very serious matter. Very, very serious matter. So the Lorentz contraction is then used, but because of Einstein's relativity, they decided to get rid of the ether altogether. We used to believe that we lived inside of a soup called ether. And Nikola Tesla said this is an energy-carrying medium that could power a city. You know, with the amount of ether in my one hand, would be all the energy I'd need to power my entire life. That's what Nikola Tesla was saying, apparently, and he was silenced because they wanted to charge us hand over fist for the energy that we need to survive. So we lived in an ether. Einstein gets rid of it so that relativity can work, so no one likes to think about us being an ether. But the word breathe has got the word ether hidden in it, if you go and think about that. So I think that breath is life. This is an electrical ether that we exist in, a soup. The dendrites within your lungs actually look like the dendrites of a tree and of a river system. They're all connected, and they're all some sort of, takes water, which is actually electricity, to charge your system. So, gravity. Now, this is the big one. And I'll be ending soon after that, and I'll be able to take some questions. But gravity, guys, gravity... He's a natural. You're a natural.
No, I'm not.
Okay. He doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. So, gravity, yes, why do I stay down? Why don't I go up? Why don't, well, you are heavier than the air that you're in. If I filled this room with water, we would float. Why? Because we are less heavy or less dense than the water that we are displacing. So it's really all about displacement, density, and buoyancy. The helium balloon, we know, will float. The helium balloon, we know, will float, and the anvil will float on a bed of mercury. Why? Because of the difference in their density. So an apple will fall through the floor, but it will float on water. I've changed the medium, and therefore I've changed the laws of gravity. A football, if I force it under the water, will naturally want to go up, just in the same way as a helium balloon will want to go up, because it's in a more dense environment for the gas that it is, or the thing that it is, say in the case of your body, or a ton of steel. A ton of steel will fall through the water very quickly, but if I hammer it out into the hull of a boat, I'm now displacing more water than it weighs, it floats.
But when the water did that,
What?
then.
What they're going to teach you in school is that a guy called Newton was sitting under a tree, and an apple fell on his head, and he came up with the idea of gravity. What pulled the apple down? Well, what they don't like to tell you is that that's actually just the expression of potential energy given to the apple by the tree. Why? Because for 6 months, the tree was bringing up, drop by drop, milliliter by milliliter, water to fill that apple up to 150 grams. Eventually, the connection cannot support that 150 grams, and it returns to the ground from whence it came. That's all that is. So when people, because they do this to me in the street, they'll pull out their keys and drop them on the floor, or drop their backpack on the floor and say, look, that's gravity. Okay, you can call that gravity if you want to, but then to say that that effect is going to mean that I can walk underneath in Australia and not know it, that the gyroscope on my plane is going to somehow automatically realign itself to a new perpendicular, just because you could pick something up and drop it back down again. You pick something up, you impart potential energy. You force the ball under the water, you impart potential energy, which once released must express itself so that that thing can come back into its own natural buoyancy. Anyone who's done diving will understand buoyancy very well. And it's 10 meters down, and it's 20 meters down, 30 meters down, etc. And you know that different pressures are happening. And for me, those pressures are happening in a parallel or horizontal line from the position that I'm in. I could dive at 30 meters, and if I could stay under for hours, I would never have to vary myself down. I listened to a former F-16 fighter pilot talking about his final awakening to the fact that the Earth cannot be a globe. And he said, well, the way that we do our training is that we have guys flying in towards us from 100 miles away. And me and my fellow pilot, we're scanning the sky at 20,000 to 50,000 feet like this. And if my oncoming plane was also flying at 20,000 feet at 80 miles away, he'd have to be below me on a globe because everything is going down away. And that would be impossible because we can see them at 100 miles. The American military use an electromagnetic weapon called the railgun. The railgun fires a charge at Mach 15, and its line of sight from one ship to another, 100 miles. They can paint that ship with a signal, and they will hit that target at 100 miles, and the projectile has not deviated. It's going so fast, they can get there in seconds, and it doesn't have to account for curvature at all. And if we live on a globe like they tell us, the curvature, the formula for curvature, which is what really got me into this subject, is 8 inches per mile squared. Which means that at 10 miles, it's 8 times 10 times 10, which is 800 inches. And growing up by the sea, as I did, I knew that I had seen things in the distance at 10 miles and further that had no occlusion of water, no 800 inches.
Did you ever solve that problem, David? If I put something a mile away and it drops 8 inches, and something else a mile away and it's only 8 inches, but from there it's only like it's actually.
That's right.
2 inches.
That's right. I went on with Bob from Globusters and Jeranism. I went on their show in 2019 to try and say to them that even this 8 inches per mile squared is probably a con. That if we really lived on a sphere, it would be a little bit like living on a football, because the sphere that we're on is the same dimensions, just obviously much larger than every other ball, a basketball, ping pong ball. They're all the same. So what I say to people is that if I was traveling from the North Pole to the South Pole, it would be a 12,500 mile journey over the skin. That's what we're told. That's half of the way around the Earth, the globe. But it's also 8,000 miles from the top to the bottom. So that means, practically, logically thinking, I would expect if I was doing a mountain and I knew that over this distance I'm going to drop this amount, then my average descent will be X over that distance. Right? So the same is true with the globe, in my view, is that we should be going down by 600 meters for every 1,000 meters we travel. So if that were true, we would all immediately know that it's impossible for that to be our reality, because we can see much further. And now, so I won't go any much further on that, but just to say that with long-range photography, we're able to see things at distances. At distances that belie the idea that we live on an 8-inch per mile squared globe. I tell people that people are proud that you can see the White Cliffs of Dover from France, but that's a 20-mile journey. And 20 miles on using that formula is about 300 feet of curvature, which is the entirety of the White Cliffs of Dover. We should see none of them, but people can see on a clear day down to the beach in Dover. Recently, a gentleman went up to the highest point in Wales, and at just the right time of day, he was able to look back at the Alps and capture a photograph of mountains which he's being able to pinpoint and say, yes, these are the exact distances between them. This is what I'm looking at, and it's 700 miles away. A guy in America called J. Tolan Media, he took an infrared camera in a plane from California and looked down into Mexico, and he's been able to plot the entire coastline for 1,000 miles accurately with this imagery. So we know that we can see a lot further than we've been told that the model should allow for. So whatever the Earth is, we know that water must be level, and that you can sail around a flat Earth in the same way as if you've ever been to a mini town, one of these mini mini worlds. You know, you're sailing around on a flat boat. You know, you can sail around, you can drive around London on the M25. Doesn't make it a globe. You can put a magnet, a powerful magnet at the center, the Docklands, say, and then your compass, as you traveled around the M25, would always be pointing that north and this east. And so I would, over 20,000 miles in the case of the Earth, so I would follow my eastern heading, making slight adjustments, but I'm always following east, but I can do that on a flat Earth. Because people often say, how do you sail around the Earth if it's not a globe? I say, how do you sail around an Earth if it is a globe? You know, because to take a ship underneath and for it to be stuck underneath there, and as I said in my early presentation at the beginning, it's like we've never seen any images of that. We've never seen ships and planes and so on flying, and the ISS have never sent us pictures, but people tell me that they can see the ISS at night. And I say, is it possible that this is a hoax? Because the ISS is about the size of a 747 plane, and a plane at 7 or 8 miles is hard to see, but still there, double that distance, and it's becoming impossible to see, which is why the U-2 spy planes are used at 60, 70,000 feet, because no one can see them that far up. The International Space Station isn't feet up, it's 250 miles up. And people believe that they can zoom in on something that's traveling at 19,000 miles an hour at 250 miles. And I say, if that were true, then at least the guys on the ISS should be able to zoom in with the powerful tools that they got. Remember, $75 million a day or whatever the NASA gets, they can afford a really nice camera. They didn't bother taking one up to the moon and saying, hey, why don't we just sling up a video camera from the 1960s here, position it for 6 hours looking at the Earth and watching it spin and doing all of that beautiful stuff. No, we've got to spend money on golf clubs and dune buggies, because you don't really need to see that evidence. In fact, they didn't take a photo of the Earth until the final mission, the 6th and final mission. They didn't bother. Wow. We went to Grand Canyon and came back, and the family said, how about the selfies? Well, we didn't take any photos. What? You've gone to the Grand Canyon and didn't take a single photo. They went to the Neil Armstrong. In fact, I've not done this work myself, but people have told me that they never mention the Earth once during the moon landings. They never say, hey man, look up there, or down there, the Earth is doing this right now, or it's going, something else is happening. But come right closer to Earth at 250 miles. They should be able to zoom in on London, on the London Marathon day, and say, look at that, we can see the snaking of humanity running the London Marathon. They should be able to do that. Or there's a rugby game on at Twickenham. We can do that. Because if you can film something many times bigger than Twickenham, traveling 19,000 miles, many times smaller than Twickenham, if you can film that, then they can turn the camera back around and go, let me film you. They never do that. And whatever you see from the ISS feeds, it's always cloudy. It's always, and in the last 10 years or so, they've started showing us these beautiful nighttime scenes of Italy all lit up and so on. That's because the computer technology has gotten better. You know, the 1960s stuff is just a joke when you go back and look at it. You go, you know, it's like watching old movies and going, oh, look at the cinematography back from the 1920s, you know. You can see all the cuts, you can see all the errors. And people who spend a lot of time looking at NASA footage find these errors. They see people wearing harnesses. They see bubbles leaving helmets. The BBC announces that an astronaut nearly drowned in 2014 during a spacewalk. Or was he in the swimming pool in Texas? I have to say I prefer that idea, because now they have to use little breathing apparatus when they go on a spacewalk. We've seen a reflection of a scuba diver during a spacewalk. You know, we've never seen them put the ISS together in a warehouse and say, right, this is how this is going to work, this is how this is going to work. Right, now we've proven it, we'll fly that piece up there and connect it. We've never seen that. All of a sudden, magically, it's in space, because it's on TV. And why, just as a tidbit, I think that they have the Russian section and the Japanese section and the Chinese, the American section, is because these different cosmonauts are doing their own bit in their own country, and then very often, occasionally, they'll bring them all together for a little group hug and say, "Oh, look, the Americans have got together with the Chinese astronauts or the Russians or whatever." You know, Russia and America have been at war, they have all these difficulties, and yet when it comes to space, they work together perfectly. When it comes to the Antarctic Treaty, which limits us from moving beyond the 60th south parallel, they get on just fine. BP and Shell and none of these people are banging on the government's door saying, we want what Admiral Byrd said is out there. He said there's energy, there's coal, there's stuff that'll keep humanity rich for centuries. They would want some of that, wouldn't they? No, it's the penguins we're now mostly concerned about. So you can't go to beyond the 60th parallel unless by organized, controlled, militarized tour. And then you'll get to go on a peninsula, spend 2 or 3 days and a lot of money to say that you've been to the South Pole, when in fact you've probably been 75 degrees south. It's like people who go to Lapland believe they've been to the North Pole when they're somewhere at 65 or 67 degrees north. Now, there's a lot of stuff in our world that is kept from us and that we don't know. But anvils float on Mercury. I mean, and then, you know, where's gravity? Well, it's all about the buoyancy factor. So is everyone in on it? I say no. Just like with COVID, the doctors weren't in on it. They just believed the bullshit. So, I mean, the science. Trust the science. Trust the science. I lost a YouTube channel because I wasn't trusting the science. And I was trying to give medical information, and although they called it misinformation, we now know that. Anyway, but so no, not everyone's in on it. I think very few people are in on it. I've met satellite engineers and people who work in the industry, during my activism times, and they truly believe what they're selling. Just like a preacher of any religion truly believes that his religion, his belief, is absolutely right, and he will give it to his children with an open heart, with a clear heart, clear conscience. And I think the same is true with a lot of the science, is that we're given these ideas of how old we are, how long it's been going, evolution, Big Bang. Big Bang is a Catholic invention, by the way. I tell people that because the guy who invented the Big Bang theory, George Lemaitre, is a Catholic Jesuit. Just by coincidence, of course. All the times when you hear this history, but the guys that were coming up with this heliocentric model were not favored by the Vatican. They were jailed and so on. No. The Vatican was giving them a free place to stay while they continued to do their work. But the Vatican likes to play itself off as being, no, we didn't really want this stuff. But in fact, they're kind of engineering this, you are not that important. Because at the end of the day, what the globe does for us is make us insignificant. That's the truth of it. Is we are less important on a globe than we are in a centrally created environment. Once you get, and I was, by the way, if you'd asked me in 2014 or when my mother passed away in 2011, if you'd asked me if there is a God, I would say absolutely not. But what Flat Earth gave me, and the DMT experience in 2015, but what Flat Earth gave me was this insight that, wow, maybe this place was created on purpose. And we all understand Fibonacci, we see the golden spiral, we see the beauty of everything, and yet I was an atheist and a non-believer. And then the Flat Earth was a real kick up the pants to say, wow, you are maybe in something far more special. And if the people in charge have been manipulating our education system such that we would never know that, and the religious orders have not actually fought against it, just like they didn't do with COVID. They've just gone hand in glove with the government. So I suggest that they're all working towards this super control of your mind. Total control, cradle to grave, of your mind. Because once they have your mind, then they can get your body, your avatar, to do things that are counter to what the intended creation design was for your life or your story. So for me, the electromagnetic earth brings everything back to us, back to one, back to a singularity in which we are equal, as I said in my presentation earlier, we are equal expressions of whatever the divine source of all is. And that's what we are. And I really hope that this information today helps you free yourself from some of the shackles that we've all been given. We were set a sail at birth where someone had come along with a mallet and smacked you in the keel, or punctured you in the heel with that heel prick test, which immediately goes up the sciatic nerve into your groin, unsettling you in your root chakra. And that's the beginning of the post-birth trauma. You've just been born, you're partially blind, you're frightened, and then all of a sudden the most searing pain up your leg. So this is, but it's just, and it's one of many injuries and woundings that occurs to us all. And so we have to know that the lies, as well as the traumas of these, have had an impact on us. And I wouldn't lie to you if it didn't serve my ends. So the people who arrange the world, they are lying to us because it serves their ends. So it's important to dial out of those lies, and then once you've dialed out of the lies, then to kind of recalibrate yourself on a electromagnetic earth in which each of us may be the center of the universe. I break the word universe down into you and I verse. Because God created through the speak and the vibration. And so are we not speaking on behalf of creation when we talk, and when we go to war with each other, then we are diminishing and demeaning, which is what evolution and globes and all these things do, is to diminish and demean source and ourselves. So I think, what does this mean? I've got a picture of corpuscular rays here. Everybody knows the corpuscular rays. It's a great evidence that the sun is really close to us. I also say to people, think about the moon on a full moon night. See how the moon in the clouds will create a hotspot above you. Now, as that hotspot wanes away for about a mile in either direction, the clouds become dark again. However, if your friend who's 5 miles or 10 miles down the drag seems dark over there, ask them to go outside and have a look at the moon. And they will say, oh, it's just creating a little highlight just above my head, like a street light on a foggy night. It just happens to be close to me. I can't see any light down by you though. And that goes against this idea that there is a single light source illuminating the entire blanket of cloud. It is unique to us individually. The sunset at the beach will come to your feet, but you can't see it 50 meters down the beach where someone else is standing there and saying, oh, the sun is coming to my feet too. So is it possible that the sun, the moon, and the stars are actually encoded by you individually, and that you are picking up a signature of the system of which you are integral? We might well be the multiverse, that there are right now in this room 40 or 50 universes, each individually having their own experience but collectively coming together. But it's almost like grapes on a vine. Are we each of us individually a universe, or are we just simply collectively sharing a single universe? For me, it doesn't really matter which it is. It just seems to me that we are central to it. And once we know that, we no longer get caught up at any of the Ukraine, COVID, the stories that are constantly used to keep us out. We're going to Mars. We're going out. And there's a threat out there. And once I have you in threat, I have you in fear, I have your vibration low, then I can control you far more easily. And that's what I think is happening in the world today. And so that's what it means, is that we can move from sort of this external sun worship to an internal, I am the sun, or I am the expression of God. I say to people, and you may not have heard me say it quite clearly enough, in that that video from Speaker's Corner in 2018, that I think that whatever Jesus was, he was trying to tell us that you are what I am. In fact, you can go on and do more than I will. And I say to people, because I speak in Speaker's Corner and there's a lot of religiosity in Speaker's Corner, I say that if you look in the mirror tonight and speak verbatim the words that Jesus said, that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to God but through me, and you're saying that to yourself. That your connection to God is intimate. That if God, and the Muslims say that if you want to find Allah is closer to you than the jugular vein in your neck, we call this the temple. I think that this is the body of God or Christ, and that we live within the body of Allah, or all that is. And that's our speech. So, how am I doing for time, actually? Okay, I've got a few, just 5 minutes or so for questions, if anyone's got any questions.
I truly believe that God gave us the capacity to heal our own bodies.
Yes.
And all we've got to do is go inside and ask what is happening in our body. What is this about? And it will reveal to you. And if you then deal with that, you'll find you will not need your doctor.
Awesome, and I think that food is the medicine as well. That because we are what is out there, you have gold in your body, everything that's out there is in you. And so you're meant to kind of match those frequencies. So talking about cymatics, then this plant has a slightly different vibratory signature to that plant, which is why this plant's vibration will be powerful and useful in this particular case. But yes, and the power of intention, or the power of the mind.
Well,
yes.
the other thing that I knew anyway, recently my husband passed a kidney stone.
Uh-huh.
And we had some old stuff, and we had some in deep conversation just a few nights before, and then he passed his kidney stone. But prior to that, he started drinking carbonated water.
Okay.
Not drunk it before. But he goes to the doctor to find out that it is a kidney stone, and the doctor says, the things that can help is carbonated water.
Wow.
And he'd already started drinking it because our body tells us what we need if we listen.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there any other questions?
I've got one. Because when I talk to people about, I might say, well, I just have never believed man landed on the moon. And they ask why, and I give lots of reasons, and Alan about, look at the contraptions, la 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 la. And they say, well, what about the Russians? Did they believe that America's landed on the moon? And that's the bit I can't really answer, because were they in on it? Getting back to your, are they in on it? Yeah. Were they in on it with the Americans, with NASA?
Absolutely. And so once you realize that, it's like, okay, so all these wars between the countries, and by the way, I went to a war in a country called Angola in 1987. I wrote a book about it, and it was Russia versus America by proxy. So you realize that at the top table, there is no differentiation, and that includes the Chinese, by the way. Because once you get to have your own space agency, you are high enough up the club for them to entrust you with this truth. Same with the nuclear story, it's same with other things. So the way they played it, I believe, is that they gave Russia some propaganda, some early wins, first man in space, first dog, first satellite, these sort of things. Look how great we are. And then the Russians consider but we didn't need to go to the moon. That's why we let them go. Kind of thing. So they've got their own version of propaganda that suits their narrative to give them that kind of sort of equal footage. But they couldn't necessarily have two agencies go and work independently, because if two movie makers made movies independently, they wouldn't necessarily match everything up. So I think that could have been tricky. Which is why I say, look at the Chinese rover and what they hide that now, because it's so obviously fake. So it does mean that there's collusion at the very top table. Absolutely. And Operation Paperclip sent some of the Nazis to Russia and some to America. So they were spreading that kind of technology and that knowledge that the Germans seem to have around.
Well, that's good information when I get asked again.
So that's the beautiful thing about knowing this, is that every government is simply an element of franchise. And if COVID didn't prove that to you, then this hopefully does. But because 200 governments all locking their countries down in pretty much the same way in the same month. No, really. Yes,
I was going to just echo what you said, and you just said it, which is why it's pivotal for all the reasons you said. I've been on a journey, similar time frame earlier, but clears out so much nonsense and frees you from so much kind of the animal farms that are built on top of the foundational lines, which are there to harvest you, keep you at that level. And once you understand we've been living, whether we, unfortunately, in a one world system for a very long time already. So when you've got, you know, it's China virus, and you know, I'm glad you called him out, Elon Musk is doing good. When you realise they're all in together at that top level, and frees you. It's a hard one because if you will, but all that illusion of countries and states, you know, I think it frees you from a lot of that mid-level awake stuff, which is just actually they're quite happy to go on because it's protecting the foundational line. So when you get involved, that actually frees up so much space and in your own life and in your research.
Thank you. I'm one of those people who go out and challenge chemtrails and 5G and all of these things, but then you realize that, gosh, all of this is keeping me in the construct. It's keeping me in the fight. Even though I'm no longer submitting, I'm resisting. And that's the left wing to the right wing of the same bird.
It's actually a trauma response. A trauma response is either to resist or to submit. We saw submission in COVID.
And then after 6 months, finally people started resisting.
And either way, you're not free because you're still engaged.
The trauma resisting and starting it as well.
Exactly.
Yes. People were awakened.
Yes. And we've been traumatized in the years preceding COVID, okay, with Ebola and other kinds of bird flus and all that.
On so many levels.
Yeah. You had a question, mate?
Yeah, it's not really a question. It's just we believe, or we know that they control us by separating us.
Yes.
You know, food, race, you know,
colour,
religion,
national borders,
everything. They keep us apart.
Flags.
What I really believe is that they are all together. So when we see a war in Ukraine or a war in Afghanistan or in Iraq, we know it's all financed by the same people and
correct,
the same agenda and everything. So by keeping us believing, or the majority of people believe, a lot, you know, mass number of people believing that they are separate countries, you know, protecting us for a reason and going to war to protect us. You know, like Tony Blair, who I can't believe hasn't been hung by now. But yeah, once you believe that, once you understand that they are all together, keeping us apart, then the whole house of cards.
But this is the point about us being creators, is that if I can control what you believe, then you will create on my behalf. And when I was a youngster, in my early 20s, and I came to the UK, came back to the UK and did a bit of work as a builder, I came across this idea that the Irish were not as popular, or the Germans or French. And I hadn't heard any of that propaganda growing up. You know, for me it was, you know, whatever the apartheid stuff was. You know, so it's and how they created apartheid by engineering what people believe, and then we create the horror show. So, you know, like I said about the doctors in COVID, is that the scientists and doctors who are pushing all the virus crap, they are believing it because they've had their creator power stolen, needle in the heel, and then it goes on.
The frustrating thing is if we just stop complying, we bring the whole thing down, you know. But there's just no ways.
But here's a note of caution: is that if we brought the whole thing down today, we'd kind of be screwed because we rely so much on the thing, the beast. You know, it's almost like we have this love-hate relationship with Tesco's, but we need Tesco's. We need. At the moment, we need certain things because we were hit in the heel, because we were traumatized. So you can't simply open the gates of Shawshank and expect all those people to say, oh, you can all go free now because you were here on a lie. You need to work your way out, just like the lead character does. You need to find your way out rather than just be handed the keys to the captaincy, as I said earlier on. You want to be captain of the ship? You need to go out at night. You need to go out in a storm. You need to travel different waters and different coastlines and so on. And then you've earned your captaincy.
I read a book once where this guy was wrestling with his emotion, wrestling with you know, living in the current world and day to day and all the crap that goes with it. And somebody said to him, work on your pineal gland, open up your pineal gland. I think it took him about 5 years, and he opened his pineal gland and he just saw all that.
Awesome. Well, I suggest to people that your pineal gland, even in an electromagnetic universe, your pineal gland is like the old Dodgem cars from the 70s and 80s. You know, the Dodgem car had this like probe that touched the electric roof? That's your pineal gland. I believe your pineal gland is your emitter or receiver to, or it's your North Pole, I suppose, to the system, and which is why they fluoridate the water. And I recommend distilled water if you can, distill your water to drink that and help clean
And
these
if you're an
things out.
electromagnetic being yourself, if you're the micro or the macro, then that inner work, that healing your own energy system is the most important. And it's not a destination, it's a continuation.
So in a way, guys, if I can kind of close on this because we are running out of time, but if I could say that actually there's something beautiful about this message that I have today, and that is that what if you have signed up to become like a high-level Jedi ship's captain? And in order to do that, I had to drop you into the worst southern oceans where there is terrible storms. But the truth is that you know what those storms are, and you are challenged to meet those storms and find your way to safe harbor. That's what you're challenged to do. You can't get given it by somehow us, banging in the doors of Downing Street and going, okay, we're hanging all of these criminals. That's not going to stop the football hooligan, to use an analogy. It's not going to stop the football hooligan from still having his Everton versus Liverpool enmity. They will still have that program running in them, no matter what you do. So it's like a challenge that you don't necessarily have to pick up. But once you pick it up, you have to be willing to kind of work your own way to a free relationship with the world. And eventually, maybe, and I'm an optimist, but eventually there's enough light in the world to mean that when we raise children and we change the world into a more, loving kind of world, then we're able to do that because we've got the captaincy. We've actually done the hard yards. But it's just like anyone else. My little child, I wouldn't want him to kind of be, oh well, you don't have to practice to be the fastest at running 100 meters. But the truth is, you must. If you want to raise your soul story, then you have to do the work. No one on the BBC is here to do that for you. They're just here to alert you to the fact that we're lying to you about pretty much everything, and that you need to kind of work the shit out for yourself. Don't sit on the sofa and let it come to you. You're going to have to get out there and do it yourself. So that's that. Cool. Thanks, guys.